Hi, my name is K.Thomas, W1DED. Today I have with me Dave Lloyd, K3EL. Dave is a co-founder of the DX Perseverance Group. This is a group of very experienced DXpeditioners and contesters that have a lot of notable DXpeditions in the log. They're also planning the Clipperton Island DXpedition in January, where they'll be operating under the call sign TX5S. I asked Dave to join me today from his home in Virginia to talk about two things: the DX Perseverance Group, because I'm very intrigued by that, but also clearly the Clipperton trip coming up. Dave, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, good morning, Kevin, and thank you very much for the opportunity. It's good to be on your broadcast today.
I've got to say, after talking to you last week and thinking that we were just going to talk about Clipperton, and then we got a little bit sidetracked with the DX Perseverance Group. Just really impressive what you and your colleagues have put together with that group. Tell me how and why that ever got formed.
Yeah, well, the name of the group, actually, Perseverance DX, comes from the place where it was formed. And the idea, the inception was actually in Perseverance Harbour, which is a sheltered landing in Campbell Island in the New Zealand subantarctic islands. So a number of us went on an expedition there, ZL9HR, to Campbell Island back in 2012. And for a number of us, it was our first ham radio expedition. Certainly was for me. I've been looking for the opportunity to participate for a little while at that point, and ZL9HR came along. But of course, during an expedition, you've got time to sit around and talk with your fellow teammates, and turned out there were several of us who were very interested in continuing the expeditioning, but were also interested in actually organizing our own trip, and so trips, and so that's where the idea of getting together and organizing future expeditions came from. And so if you look at the website, you'll see there are several folks listed there as founding members: myself, Gene K5GS, Glenn K4KY, Pista HA5AO, and Les W2LK. And so over the next couple of years, we started working on the following project, or our first project, is what we called ourselves in the end, the Perseverance DX Group.
So I'm not completely surprised that after going on an expedition together and sharing that space and operating, that you would have gelled as a team. What does sort of surprise me is that 11 years later, it's still moving ahead. That doesn't always happen. What do you attribute that to, the fact that you've stuck together and continue to go on DXpeditions?
That's an interesting question. Well, I think partly just that we've had a fairly regular rhythm of organizing trips. So every couple of years we've managed to put something on with, not surprisingly, a little bit of a hiatus during COVID. But I think many of the prime organizers, if you like, we get on quite well together. And so that helps. And generally it's I won't say it's a completely drama-free process, but we've done enough of these now that we pretty much know how we think and what we will intend to do and how we will organize the planning and such like. So it's become a fairly well-oiled team over the years.
So clearly you're getting together for the actual DXpedition, but how often do you get together in person when you're not doing a DXpedition? Or is it all via phone and Zoom?
There's a lot of phone and Zoom, but there are occasions during the year that one or other of us will meet. A lot of the folks are actually based on the West Coast, so there's a bit more of a concentration in California and in Arizona, and so I think those folks physically see each other more often, but otherwise there are meetings like the Visalia DX convention or Dayton or wherever that we meet up at.
So at this point, I've talked to enough DXpedition team leaders or teammates, people like Adrian, K08 SCA, who's going to Swains, James Gallo, who just got back from American Samoa. And these trips typically take, if not months, years to plan. How far in advance has the Clipperton trip been in the planning mode?
Well, we've had plenty of time given the break with COVID. But our last trip was in 2020 to South Orkney, and so you're always thinking about where could the next one be, and hopefully having a few different options, because although you might want to go to a particular place, as you well know, there are many obstacles, whether it's finding appropriate transport, whether it's permissions, and often it's permissions, in fact, which is the big roadblock. So we had a couple of ideas which we were pursuing directly after South Orkney, but some of them didn't pan out, and Clipperton was the one that bubbled to the surface as we managed to overcome some of these roadblocks along the way, whereas others perhaps were you reach a point where you're stuck and you just can't move forward, and so look for something else.
So Dave, I'm curious how many members are in the DX Perseverance group, and even more curious to understand how the team is chosen. Is it a first come, first served type of thing, or is it based upon skill level or what they bring to the table? How was the ultimate team decision made for Clipperton?
Well, there's a nucleus of folks who are actually doing most of the organizing, and so those are sort of automatically almost going to be on the team. And then after that, you've got to look at, well, okay, who else has expressed a particular strong interest in this project? Who's going to bring particular skills which are necessary and which we need to fill on the team? So there's a variety of things. I mean, obviously, most of the group has been on previous expeditions as part of PDXG. But we always have a few new folks who are coming in. It's always good to have new blood, bring in new people and such like. So there's a little bit of the folks who are doing the organizing are likely to be going. Partly it's people who've been before, and partly we're looking always to try and expand that group, particular skills that might be needed.
So I'm curious also why you decided upon Clipperton. You just mentioned that there's typically a few names on the short list. Clipperton was chosen for 2024. And just for everybody listening, Clipperton Island is barely an island. It's an atoll in the East Pacific, I believe about 700 miles off the coast of Mexico. I believe you'll be traveling from San Diego. So just to give an idea of where it is, it's got quite a storied past. It's been made some history with presidential visits. It's had castaways on the atoll waiting to be rescued. I think there's been some fights over ownership. So it's a very interesting place in the world. But why did you and your team choose to go to Clipperton?
Well, partly, as I say, because it was possible. We were able to get a landing permit for there, and that was partly through the good efforts of an acquaintance of the group in French Polynesia. So we had help from local hams. The radio operation and such like is actually administered from French Polynesia. So Clipperton is a French island. Some of the administration is from French Polynesia rather than from France itself. But it is an interesting target. I mean, if you look back in ham radio history, there have been some good expeditions there. It's a place which is well known in the expeditioning world. The primary French DX association is the Clipperton DX Club. So Partly it was just it's a storied place in ham radio DXpeditioning, and so that makes it an interesting and attractive place to try and go to.
So I've got to believe that getting to a place like Clipperton, again, I think you're shipping out of San Diego. It's got to be a pretty substantial journey, pretty expensive. How does the funding happen with a DXpedition of this size? Is it done by the individuals? Clearly, they're sponsors. How does that look?
Mm. So obviously there are a lot of upfront costs in this sort of activity. So the boat has to be paid for before you actually leave. And that's typically the largest expense, and it certainly is for this expedition. So if you're looking at how we hope to distribute where the funds come from, the goal is that approximately half the expense is going to be borne by the team members, and we hope that approximately half might be borne by contributions from whether it's foundations like the NCDXF or other clubs or individuals. So, that's the goal. We're a fair way from there yet. But of course, that funding comes in over time. Quite a bit comes in actually after the expedition has gone on the air. And so the way we fund these is usually all of the team members make a hefty upfront payment, and indeed, I think everyone in the team has now made their full payment. So here we are, several months before we actually sail, but the boat and many other things have to be paid for. So those payments are enough to get us in the water, so to speak, and then hopefully, if the fundraising does well, we'll be able to refund some monies back to the team. But like I say, the goal is approximately a 50-50 split, and we've done enough of these that we have a reasonable idea of what we might expect from donations and such like, and for how much we have to set the team member payments for in order to fund the expedition to get it into the water, so to speak, and then what we might get back in terms of reimbursement afterwards.
So as you just said, you've done this enough times that the funding, the donations, you have some sort of pattern to follow. I've got to expect when it comes to equipment, that's the same way. You must have a checklist of proven equipment, proven antennas that you repeat over and over again. And at the same time, with changes in technology, I suspect that has changed. How has it changed over the past decade? What does your equipment look like now, say, compared to Campbell Island, for example?
Funnily enough, quite similar in many ways. I remember dragging my K3 and a KPA amplifier in Pelican cases on the airplane going down to New Zealand, and then hauling them over to Campbell Island. And these days, when we're off to Clipperton, we'll have quite a few K3Ss with us and some K4s as well. So it's on that first trip to Campbell Island, we had a variety of different radios, in fact, but we tried to standardize a bit more, and over the years, Helicraft has been a great supporter, and so for many years, in fact, they provided all the radios and some of the amplifiers, and indeed on this trip again, they're supporting us with some K4s and some KPA 1500s. So it's been quite good to be able to standardize around one set of radios, so you've only got one set of interfaces. Everyone is it's going to be easier for everyone to operate, basically.
I understand from your website and also from talking to you earlier, this is an all-band, all-mode effort, and you've got a rather sophisticated operator schedule that you've put together, or at least the framework for it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. So we've used a similar system for a number of years now. So basically, we break up the group into operating teams of say 4 or 5 or 6 people, depends on the size of the group. This time we have a slightly larger group than what we've usually done before. So these folks are scheduled for a number of hours each day, usually 2 4-hour slots. And then the next, so Group A might have a 4-hour slot in the morning and a 4-hour slot at night. And then Group B, another 2 slots. Group C will have another 2 slots. And obviously they're staggered. So we schedule a certain number of the radios, but not all of the radios. So we'll actually have more stations than we do scheduled operators at any particular time. So the idea is we spread around a basic minimum amount of operating time. And so if you're scheduled to be on the air at that time, you, in coordination with the other folks on your scheduled slot, will decide which radios they want to use, which bands, which modes, etc. But then there are spare radios available. And so folks who want to and are available can then come and pick up one of those spare radios. And so they can choose a band or a mode which isn't perhaps being operated by someone who's already on their scheduled slot. So we find by doing it like this, as I said, everyone gets a minimum of radio time. But equally understanding there are a lot of other activities that, whether it's simple things like eating or sleeping, or whether it's refilling generators or fixing an antenna that's blown over, or doing the really exciting things like digging a new latrine, then there's a lot of activity, a lot of work that has to be done. So, having a somewhat flexible schedule like this allows people to do the work that you need to do to make the expedition run, but at the same time keep the radios on the air.
So it begs the question: is this a collaborative leadership model, or is this a dictatorship?
Well, a little bit of both, probably. But people know which teams they're going to be in. They know where they're scheduled. The way we've done it in the past, I'm not sure if we'll do exactly the same in Clipperton, is to have someone who's designated as a team leader for each of those operating teams. And the idea is that they would keep an eye on, okay, are we covering the right bands? Do we know that at a certain time we need to be on 12 meters or 10 meters and point towards Europe because there's a very short opening to Scandinavia, for example, from Clipperton. And so the team leaders of each of the operating teams should be coordinating amongst themselves and trying to plan so that we actually, take advantage of the band openings that should be there. So we know, for example, that pretty much all day long, we should be able to work people throughout North America without too much difficulty. But as I was just suggesting, say to Scandinavia, there's some fairly short openings on some of the higher bands, and so the team leaders for each of the teams should be looking at that and trying to schedule appropriately. So there's certainly some flexibility. If you're if you really want to be on 20 CW, that's fine. But if we need that someone goes on 10 for a couple of hours with a particular goal in mind, particular geography, then that's maybe where the dictatorship comes in. But usually these things work out without too much friction.
So Dave, the framework that you sent me, the operating schedule framework, showed teams of 6 to 5 people. Is that the same model that'll be used in Clipperton, 5 to 6 scheduled operators? And then how many additional radios are available beyond that?
So we'll have 8 stations, which are primarily HF. There's also going to be a satellite VHF EME station. So 9 in total. And we should have quite a variety of antennas. You mentioned antennas earlier, and I didn't really touch on that subject, but the antenna plan really depends on where you're going and what the nature of the terrain is and such like. So if we're going to an island where we're very close to the sea, we can actually put antennas pretty much on the seashore. Then we typically will use verticals or vertical arrays to give some directionality, and they will be right on the seashore. So this is a very good and very lightweight option for that sort of location. So that works for Clipperton. It worked for Ducie, for example. But there are other locations where, although you might be on an island, you're not really able to operate from close by the shore. And then, so there we'll, use a different plan, usually with horizontal beams, hopefully put up on high points on the land to give us a little bit of extra height. But so we have a variety of different antenna options, and we will choose basically depending on what's dictated by the location we're going to. In the case of Clipperton, as I said, mostly vertical dipole arrays, for example, for the high bands, but we'll also have a couple of hex beams as well. And so the idea is just to give a lot of flexibility in terms of how many stations we can put on at the same time. So, for example, if you've only got a couple of bands open, you would like to be able to have stations on those bands, maybe more than one station. And so the vertical and horizontal polarized antennas help us achieve that. We have two different camps located at a fair distance from each other. So again, the separation should help allow us to, if necessary, have two stations on 40 or two stations on 20 or whatever it is at the same time, taking advantage of propagation when we need to.
And what can you tell me about logging? What are you using for logging software? And is there going to be any real-time logging, or is it all going to be uploaded when you guys are back?
So we usually use N1MM as the logging software on the island. Everything is networked together, so usually you can see what's going on in real time, which is very nice. The operators on the island. We should have a good internet connection. Starlink have told us in writing that we're in the footprint, and we should have a good, robust connection from Clipperton. Of course, we'll see when we get there, but in principle, we should have good connectivity, and so it should be possible to upload on a daily basis at least. But so that's the plan at the moment.
And Dave, what's your best advice for operators who want to get Clipperton to log?
From North America, it's actually not that far. It's a relatively easy path. So I think the challenge is not so much getting a signal which can be heard, but getting through the pileups. So it's any expedition. The first few days are going to be crazy, but it's likely to calm down a little bit after a few days. And we hope to have quite a few stations on the air, so that will help spread folks out a little bit as well. If you've got 4 or 5 stations or more on different bands at any one time, then hopefully that spreads the crowds out a bit, and so thins things out, makes it easier for anyone to work. But it's probably going to get easier after the first week, for example. And I think all the usual recommendations about listening. Okay, how is the operator actually operating? We'll obviously always be operating split. So trying to follow, where's the operator actually listening? Where was his last QSO, for example? You might be giving instructions up 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 on CW, but if you're paying attention, you can follow the pattern of the operator and figure out where might be the best place to call. But obviously there's an element of luck as well. for stations further afield, then a lot of it comes down to listening carefully for the propagation and understanding when we might be heard. And there are some propagation tools which will be linked to from K6TU from the DXpedition website. So that's the sort of thing that can help you choose when are the best times to have a good chance to put in a decent signal and be heard on Clipperton.
I would certainly recommend to anybody listening to go to the website. It's very thorough. There is a section about how best to work Clipperton, but also there's a lot of other information about propagation and equipment and backgrounds of the operators. Very well done. Dave, I really appreciate your time today. This has been very informative, and I'm sure everybody's going to really enjoy listening to this.
Okay, thank you very much. It's really great to have the opportunity to talk. So, good luck with your upcoming podcasts. You seem to be making quite a presence these days, so it's nice to be able to speak on this one. Thank you.
I've been talking to Dave Lloyd, K3EL, who will be on Clipperton Island, the atoll in the Pacific, in January 2024. If you are interested in a personal donation, you should go to their website. At minimum, take a look at the sponsors that are helping fund this trip and support them. We wouldn't have Clipperton in our logs without the effort of these operators, but also the people that are funding this and making it possible. Thanks again, Dave. Good luck.
Thank you very much.